Hello, and welcome to On the Marie Curie Couch, the podcast that aims to break down taboos and start open, honest conversations about death and dying. I'm Jason Davidson. I'm a social worker by profession, and I've worked in palliative care, hospice care, and bereavement support services for more than a decade. Each episode, we'll be speaking to a well-known guest to find out about how they feel about their own mortality and how their personal experience of bereavement has shaped the way they live their life. Today, I'm on the Marie Curie Couch with Emma Samms MBE. Emma is an actress and television host, best known for her roles as Holly Sutton in the US soap General Hospital and Fallon Carrington Colby in Dynasty. She co-founded Starlight, a national charity supporting children to experience the power of play to boost their well-being and resilience during illness. Emma's also a patron of Long Covid SOS, giving voice to those with the condition. Emma lives in Gloucestershire with her husband Simon and has 2 grown-up children. Emma Samms, welcome to the Marie Curie Couch.
Thank you so much.
How are you?
I'm all right, thank you. I'm all right. Unfortunately, I've had long COVID for 4 years now, which is a bit annoying. But other than that, life is very good.
Yeah, and how does that impact?
I mean, there's all multiple symptoms. There's little investigation by the medical field. It's very frustrating, to be suffering with something that people don't understand, the medics don't understand. But I have had a few tests lately that have revealed a few things. So there's possible help in sight. But as I say, life is good otherwise. And mostly that's because I have lovely children and a lovely husband. So I'm very grateful for that. And so many people had a much, much worse experience of COVID than me, so I'm not complaining.
So as you know, Emma, one of the aims of our podcast is to encourage conversations about death and dying. And I'd like to begin, if that's okay with you, by asking if you can tell me about a significant bereavement that you've experienced in your life.
I had a very significant bereavement when I was 9 years old, which was my brother, who was a year younger than me. And that changed the rest of my life. Not all in a bad way, because it inspired me to start the charity that I started, the Starlight Children's Foundation, which is in the United States and Australia and Canada and here in the UK. But it also made me aware of death. At 9 years old, it's not really something that I think a lot of children do have to think about, thankfully. And for example, it made me not religious. It completely switched me off religion. It also made me not afraid of dying, because I had this really strong feeling that Jamie, who was my brother, was now not in pain, and that somehow that he was okay. Not in a religious way, but just he was at peace. He was not in pain and suffering. And so it made me not afraid of dying, which has been a real blessing to have as I've got older. But it definitely made me not have any religion in my life ongoing after that, because I couldn't understand how, if there was a God, how they could have made that happen. A beautiful 8-year-old, kind, smart, gorgeous boy to have suffered like that and then died. He had aplastic anemia, which is a blood disease. It just didn't make any sense. And I know that there are explanations that, and I've had theological conversations with the religious people who have tried to explain their take on it. And of course, in a way, to have religion is a gift of comfort. And I do understand why a lot of people turn to religion. So I'm not against anyone having their own religion in any way. I just, for me personally, couldn't marry up those two things.
And you're, describing those huge question marks that are always left after the death of a child. And, that the sort of why questions and how. And I was just thinking about you being 9 as well. And, at that age, children are just developing their sense of life and death. And, you might see a child, hopefully has no experience of it and or limited experience of it, but what they might have experience of is, say, seeing a dead bird on the street and parents or guardians having conversations about the bird being dead and just helping children at that age develop that sense of life and death. But actually, for you, obviously, that was profoundly different because it was your brother and you were 9 and he was, just a year younger.
And of course, it completely devastated my family, my parents having to go through that and seeing them experiencing that, seeing my grandfather, a typical man of his generation, very stoic, in tears. It was a terrible time, and it impacted my whole take on my life, other people's lives, and it has definitely impacted on how I raised my children. Yes, it's so at age 9, something so profound happened to me. But I do like to think that my brother would be very pleased to know that his 8 years of life have actually had an effect on our world, much more widespread than any of us will have been able to have accomplished in our whole lifetime. Because, the Starlight charity has helped hundreds of thousands, if not millions of children in hospitals around the world and who are sick and unwell. And that's all because of my brother, Jamie. So I think it's not all bad, what happened with him. And it's my job to make it not all bad.
How, if in any way, did your experience of your brother's death, of Jamie's death at such a young age, and that experience of bereavement at such a young age, impact on bereavements you've experienced as an adult?
Well, that's a good question. I'm not sure I've ever thought about that. Well, I lost my father. He died over 20 years ago now. So he was only 67, but he had a brain tumor. And they did surgery, but they weren't able to completely take away all the tumor. So we knew it was going to come back. And I also have enough medical knowledge to know that that is a horrendous way to die. So as it turned out, he got all the love and huge outpouring of affection for him. He was a very, very impressive man. He was the most philanthropic. I mean, certainly that inspired me with any charity work that I've done. He was incredibly philanthropic man, a very successful self-made man, and just loved. But he was alive long enough to feel the love, which of course British people are not necessarily terribly good at communicating, especially men. So he felt it, and he was overwhelmed with how much love and he was receiving from people when they heard he was so unwell. And then rather than have a long, horrible, drawn-out death, he actually had a pulmonary embolism and went very quickly, which was a blessing for him, a bit of a shock for us. But when we sort of processed it, we realized actually that it was a very good thing that it had happened like that. And so whilst we missed him terribly, we were also pleased that for him, he'd had a good life and he'd had awareness of how appreciated he was. And he hadn't had too much pain at the end. So actually, as things go, that's something to emulate, really, is he did it all right,
And just back to your experience of bereavement after your father's death, do you think that was, was impacted by your experience of grief as a child?
Well, I think I was in a very different place because I was executor of his estate, which was very complicated. And so I had to step up. And whereas when I was a child, I wasn't able to do anything to help my family other than make cups of tea. I was 9. I couldn't comfort anyone in any significant way. But this time I had the role and the opportunity and hopefully the wherewithal to comfort people around me. And so it was much easier because I had a role. I had something to do. It meant that I didn't really process my grief for quite some time, but I did at least feel useful. And I think that that's been really a mission of my life is to just be useful, to do something to help. And that's why I was able to make Jamie's death into something useful. And I was able to be useful when my father died. But also, of course, he was older. He was still young to die, 67, but he wasn't a child. He'd had a very busy, full, productive life. So there was less grief, even though, as I say, we missed him hugely. It made more sense. It made more sense.
What's helped you in your grief?
I don't think anything helps. I think you just have to go through it. Time has to pass, and you just get used to it. I don't think anything can, nothing can bring them back, can it? So nothing really helps. I suppose in that way, I'm jealous of people who do have religion, because that, they say, it does help. But it is what it is. There's no changing it. There's no fixing it. You can help other people going through the same grief as you, grieving for the same person. Keeping busy just delays things, really, doesn't it? It delays the grieving process. But then again, maybe it fills the time between that person's death and you just getting your head around it, accepting it, learning to be without that person in your life.
Helpful distractions. Yes,
definitely. We're all good at that, I think.
But I think they can be really key in grief, actually, and without us realizing, because as you described, sometimes there's so many practical things to do and arrange and sort out, and it can be a really busy time.
Yes, and that helps and doesn't help. But for me, with suiting my personality, it helped, I think, organizing the funeral for my father, which was a very big event, and complicated, because he was quite a creative person. So he had the logo for his company was an owl. So he actually owned an owl, which obviously was kept at a sanctuary. But he owned an enormous eagle owl called Esmeralda. And he wanted the owl at his funeral. So he also owned a narrowboat, which was on canal. And he wanted to be taken to the crematorium in the narrowboat, because there was a gate from the canal to the crematorium, because Brunel had apparently gone that route. But the gate hadn't been opened for about 50 years or so, if not more. So I had to arrange how to get a coffin on and off a narrowboat. That was one thing. I had to arrange to have the gate opened, which obviously you could imagine there was some paperwork involved in that. And we had to have the owl on the boat as well. So there was plenty to do to keep me busy.
Oh, it's fantastic.
I know.
Wonderful story.
Yes, my father was he had a lot of style.
Yeah, that's very stylish. A narrowboat and an owl. Wow.
Trying to convince the chaps from the funeral home that we had to carry this very heavy coffin onto a boat, down a ramp, across it was not something they had imagined would be a requirement in their job. But we did it. It happened, and we had a glorious canal journey with people throwing flowers from the banks, because my father was, as I say, a very popular man. And it was quite the occasion.
Wonderful. It sounds beautiful. So beautiful.
Marie Curie's mission is to close the gap in end-of-life care. We're here for anyone with an illness they're likely to die from, and those close to them. Whatever the illness, wherever you are, we're with you to the end. Find out more at mariecurie.org.uk.
Can I ask, so one of the things we talk about in our work, so the people who we come across in our work, is about planning for the end of life. And so, that can be anything from, and these are not easy things, but, very practical things like writing a will, And or if somebody is diagnosed with a terminal illness, then there's things called advanced care plans. So planning care, what their wishes are and what they might want in certain situations.
It's so important because not only are you making sure that, your wishes are known, let alone stuck to, but most importantly is making sure that the people who are left behind or the people who are trying to care for you, that they're given the help and guidance and support and information. And so for my children's sake and my husband's sake, I've been really sort of quite clear about what my choices would be under those circumstances. I would hate to think that my kids would be stuck running around trying to figure out what's the best plan. Obviously, if the plan can be implemented, it's not always, best laid plans and all of that, but at least for them to have an idea. And I've actually done something which is quite extreme, I suppose, in that area, which is because I have a lot of stuff. I have a large house which I filled with stuff, nice stuff, I think. But I also have a lot of memorabilia from all of my days out in Hollywood, and magazines and clippings and photos, lots of photos. So I've got it all, but I wouldn't expect them to keep it all. So what I've done is I've left 5 boxes in my study. And I'm still working on this. They're not complete yet. But so each of my 2 kids, well, I mean, they're grown up now, obviously, they're adults, but they will have one box filled with all of their childhood memorabilia. So all of their school reports, their artwork, funny pictures from their school days, all of the things that they would like to at least see. They can bin them once they've seen it if they want, but all of their childhood stuff. Then there's another box which is full of sort of family history stuff. So some of my nice magazines that I was in, some of their things about my father and his career, which was fascinating, things about even more distant relatives. So it's all of the sort of family memorabilia. So there's 2 sets of all of that, one for each child, because you can't expect, them to take a box home and then they live in different places. So they've each got their own set of those pictures and magazines and things. And then the 5th box is my businessy things. So it'll be my will and my letter of wishes and details of all my bank accounts and where things are that they need to know to make, a passwords, list of passwords,
yes. Digital legacies,
yes,
really big
all
things.
of that stuff to make that easier on them, because my father hadn't done that for me. So there was a lot of digging around to try and figure out what accounts he had, and making sure that all got dealt with properly. So that's the fifth one. And funeral instructions, so they don't have to rack their brains for what my song choices would be, and just try and make it a bit easier on them. And then also say to them, look, take anything that you want from the house, and then feel zero guilt about selling the rest. Just bin it, sell it. Don't feel like, oh, I should keep that because mum liked it. Take what you want, and then with no guilt at all, just bin it, or sell it. But I don't want them to feel like they have to go through every item and think, oh, she was really fond of this, we can't get rid of it. That would be unfair on them and their partners, probably. It's a lot of stuff.
So important to say that as well, though, because that's so true. They would literally, because that's what happens. You sit and look over every single individual item, but if at that point they've got your words and they can hear your voice saying, do what you want with it, doesn't matter.
Yes, it's only a thing.
Yeah, it's only a thing. Yeah. And you answered my question, which I didn't get to ask. I was going to ask.
Oh, sorry.
No. I was going to ask whether you thought about your own death and whether you'd made any of those practical plans. And what I really love about, you've made lots of plans, but what I love about the boxes is it's not just the practical things like wishes, funeral wishes, and all of those really important key things which can be so helpful to those who are left behind and having to do planning and make decisions. But actually, it's the history, the family history, that's also woven into those boxes as well. They sound like wonderful gifts.
Well, and, of course, youngsters don't necessarily appreciate the importance of family history until maybe they're a bit older. So this way, if it all suddenly kicks in that they when they're, in their middle age, they think, oh, I would like to know a bit more about my family, then they can just have a rootle through these boxes and figure it out if they're interested. But it would be a shame if they lost it all and then got interested and didn't have it to access and have
Yes,
it.
so true.
Yeah.
I think that's what happens because, and that's a great message actually for anybody listening and thinking about this, because that in that moment it might be like, well, they're not going to be interested in some of that stuff now.
Right,
But
but maybe
actually,
in the future. That's why
yeah,
it can't be a huge box either, because it's got to be practical enough for them to lug around every time they move house. So
the-
yes, there's considerations in that as well.
you've already touched on this from family members, but is legacy something that's important to you?
No, not at all. I mean, I have a career that is not a very profound career. It's entertaining people, and there's no shame in that, And certainly we learned during the pandemic that distraction and entertaining people is crucial to so many people's well-being. So it's not that I'm not proud of it, but I haven't changed the world really. I haven't done anything of hugely profound, significant, other than hopefully raising two wonderful young people who I'm immensely proud of, my children. That's definitely been the most important part of my life by a long shot. But I don't expect to go down in the family history as anything special. I don't expect for to be, to keep all of my pictures and magazines and posters, and I'd like them to keep my MBE. That if they chucked that, I'd be really upset. But because I'm very proud of that. But in general, I think that my contribution to the world is not something that needs to be in any way revered by my kids. Let them get on and do things themselves, and just to only really remember me as a good mum. That would be the best legacy for me. And if that is the case, that's good enough for me, for sure.
And I can almost just hear your children now kind of saying, no way, there is masses more. And not just your children, I'm sure many others who know you. I mean, you've touched today on, you said it was Jamie's legacy. I think it's his and others, but the Starlight Foundation, and I'm sure all of your other charitable
But my
work
kids are drastically not interested in my career. They really they've no connection to it. They've probably not watched any of my films or television things. I mean, they're just not interested. But I kind of planned it that way because most of my career is in America. I raised my kids here. So that's a good start in terms of having a fairly normal upbringing. And it means nothing to them, my career. It's embarrassing enough having a mother, who shows up at school to pick you up. And they don't want you to have any personality. They don't want you to stand out in any way at all. So certainly the last thing they would want is if I was in any way drawing attention to myself. So yes, I think my lack of talking about my career or making it relevant to their childhood has been a positive thing. But the result is that they do have zero interest in my career. They think of me as their mum, and that's it. And that's how it should be.
Just a couple of more questions left. I wondered if you had anything to say or wanted to say anything to somebody listening who might be grieving right now.
I suppose, as I said before, grief is inevitable. It shows that there was love there. If you didn't have any grief, it would mean that there hadn't been the love. And it's painful, but it's a good sign. And time helps, it definitely, it doesn't make it less sad. It means that you get used to being in a world without that person. But the grief is a direct result of having loved someone and then having loved you. And if you can live your life in the way they would want you to live your life, I don't think many people, when they die, would want somebody they've left behind to be permanently miserable. I think they would want them to still have a good life. So if you can honor that, that seems important to me.
So true. Thank you. Could I ask how it's been today being on the Marie Curie couch and having these conversations?
Well, hopefully you can tell that I'm not somebody who dodges the topic. It's not something that, and this is, I'm sure, to do with having lost my brother. It's important to me to use the right terminology, not to passing or a lot of people find comfort from other terms that are less drastic to say someone has passed. I have always said somebody's died. I don't mind saying that. I don't mind talking about when I die. I don't have any qualms about focusing on that and making sure that it's not as drastic in terms of the practicalities that it was when my father died. So yes, for me to be able to, deal with it head on with no awkwardness, I think hopefully that will help my children in the future when they have to deal with it.
Is there anything you wanted to say today that I haven't asked?
Well, I do want to say is what a fantastic organization Marie Curie is, because having the words, having the skills, having the presence makes such a huge difference to so many people. And what you guys do is spectacular and on such a wide scale too. I'm in awe of your organization and how you do it, the way you do it. And I'm absolutely thrilled to get to know some of you a little more and to help in any way, because it is so needed and such a tricky area, for a whole group of you to have sorted out for so many people, to step in when so many people just don't know what to say, don't know how to help. And you help in such a profound way. So bravo to you.
Well, that's really kind of you, and thank you for saying, and we'll definitely pass that on, to all of our colleagues and all of our volunteers. That's it from me, Emma Samms. Thank you so much for joining me on the Marie Curie couch, and thank you for sharing some of Jamie's story, and especially, I think, also your father's wonderful funeral story. It's been a joy to meet you.
It's been lovely to talk to you. Thank you.
So that's all for this episode of On the Marie Curie Couch. We hope it's got you thinking about matters of life and death, and perhaps starting those conversations with your own friends and family. Marie Curie's here to help. From planning ahead to coping with bereavement, you can talk through any concerns you have around the end of life with our support line team, which also includes specially trained nurses. Call us on 0800 090 2309 or search Marie Curie online. This podcast is produced and edited by Marie Curie with support from Ultimate Content. The music featured is Time Lapse by Pan-Oceanic. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please do like and subscribe. Thanks for listening. Until next time, goodbye.